Outreach in the United States is failing, and your church may have struggled with it as well. Today on the podcast, we're going to give you 5 ways to fix it.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I am joined by my friend and co-host AJ Matthew. We are glad to have you guys listening with us today, talking about a really important topic, which is outreach. There's been some research on this, AJ, and the decline numbers in the United States. Now, this was done pre-pandemic, so I'm not sure the status of things right now. But pre-pandemic, it looked like the numbers for plateau and decline were actually not as bad as sometimes it gets reported. I know usually we'll say like 80% of churches are in decline. I think the number is probably closer to 60 or 65% of churches are in decline. There's about 30% of churches that have seen marginal growth. But the vast majority of this, AJ, is just sheep shuffling. So it's people leaving declining churches, going to a different church that maybe has a newer logo or something, I guess. Or their friend goes there or has a younger pastor or something. I'm not sure. And that's not conversion growth. So the number of churches that are growing because of evangelism, AJ, is single digits. 3, 4, 5. Under 10% for sure. Which means that when it comes to outreach, churches just aren't doing it. It's just not happening.
Yeah, for sure. Especially, the churches that we're working with, and probably a lot of them listening to this today. Outreach is just, it's not really there, or it's very minimal. It's probably a program that's been there just for a long time. And just nobody would probably be able to explain very quickly its effectiveness or why they do it. That's why this is a really important topic. I'm glad we're jumping into this today with some, I think, fresh ways of looking at outreach.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we need to address first this false premise that I think drives a lot of the failure to focus on outreach, and that's the Sunday morning machine. Trademark, the Sunday morning machine, the thing that every pastor feels like, man, if I can just make Sunday morning great, then we don't really need to do outreach because we'll be so compelling to outsiders that it'll be like a magnet. Sometimes we call this the attractional church model. Sometimes you might, in days of yore, you might have called this the seeker church model or something like that, where if we just have the Sunday morning machine at top quality, then it takes care of itself. And this ignores one major fact, which is you can have the best music, the best sermon, the best facility in the world, but if no one knows you're there, it doesn't matter. And even a couple of decades ago, AJ, there was still a cultural pull to be a part of church, or there was some sort of cultural clout. I'm a kid that grew up primarily in the 90s. And even then, Wednesday night was church night. Everyone had a church. It was not a weird question to walk up to a stranger and go, "What church do you go to?" Today, that doesn't happen. And Wednesday night isn't church night. And ball games get scheduled on Sundays even today. So the world has changed drastically. And so this focus on the Sunday morning machine, it comes at the expense at innovation and outreach.
Yeah, right.
Would you say?
Yeah, no doubt. We're getting further and further away from the mid 20th century church mindset and church culture, Christian culture in the United States. And so, more of my generation, the children of boomers who church was just what you did. Churches could depend on them. We're beginning to lose that generation now, and their kids still had kind of like this cultural church connection, but every generation now moving on is less and less, and so we can't depend on that anymore.
No,
we've got to be, fishers of men, not fishers of Christians anymore, and which was a failure of a comfortable church. The church got very comfortable in the United States in particular, and has lost sight of what the work is supposed to be about. So yeah, I think that's why this is a super critical topic that is going to reach pandemic levels if we don't address it. And I think it takes new tools. It takes a new outlook, and it takes new tools. And I think that's where we're headed with this topic today.
Absolutely. I want to one brief side note before we dive into this, how we're going to reframe this and how we're going to help you in terms of outreach. I don't want to make it sound like Sunday morning doesn't matter. It matters a whole lot. But I was actually meeting with the pastor of a very, very small church just last week. Maybe he's listening. And I encouraged him in this way, that people will put up with a lot if they believe that you are helping them. Mm-hmm. And so while it's great to invest in the quality of your music, you should. I would hope you have excellent music and that you're doing it as unto the Lord. I hope that your preaching is done as unto the Lord, and that it would be excellent. Mm-hmm. It's just not enough, and it's not where you should put your primary focus. If you can only fix one thing in your church in the next year, it shouldn't be your Sunday morning experience. It should be what you're doing in terms of outreach. Because if you are helping people and meeting people where they are at, they will excuse a lot of stuff at your Sunday morning service. They just will. They'll gloss over it and go, that could be better. Mm-hmm. That was cringe. Yeah, that was a little less. If you're reaching the old Gen Zs, but they'll put up with that stuff because they know that you care. And so if you can fix just one thing, you should focus on outreach first, and then worry about your Sunday morning machine. So that being said, let's dive into, we have really 5 ways that we feel like you can reinvent your outreach strategy. But there's a prerequisite to these 5 things. AJ, what is this prerequisite to being able to use these 5 things?
Yeah, well, it's a key piece, and that is first understanding what are the needs of your community. So let's talk briefly about community. In the past, in Aubrey's books, he's referred to this as soft boundaries around the church. And so you first have to sort of draw an imaginary line, like what geographically can we influence? What area can we influence? So you need to determine that first. Otherwise you're going to spread yourself too thin, or maybe not focus on the right areas. So you need to sort of figure out, and that's going to be different, depending on where you are. If you're in a population area that's super dense, then your boundary is smaller. And if you're more rural, it's going to be a lot larger, so figure out, where can we influence? Where can we work? And then you've got to take on the task of really understanding that. And you probably
let's pause here for just a second and address a common question. Something that comes up quite a bit, AJ, is people will say, well, we draw from a broad group, and they'll often use the outliers. They'll go, well, we've got people who are driving 30, 45 minutes away to come to church. And my response to that is usually I'll ask, well, exactly how many people are doing that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You can't draw your soft boundaries and go, well, there are 3 people out of a church of 150 who are driving from 45 minutes away and think that your soft boundaries extend that far.
And be honest, they used to live 3 miles away, but they moved out there, and they just are still going. They didn't find you from a half hour away.
That's right. That's right. They weren't like, wow, this church is so great, I'm going to drive 45 minutes for it.
Yeah.
That's not usually the case. Sometimes, I guess, but that would be exceptionally rare. So, a similar question, this is a side tangent, I suppose, but it just comes up a bunch. So I want to address it because some are probably thinking about it. It may be true that most people aren't driving from 45 minutes away, but you may have folks if you're like a downtown church, AJ, and it used to be, like you said, people were lived close by, but now everyone in the church has moved 25 minutes away to a suburb, and they're still driving in on a Sunday morning. Well, what is our community? Is it the people who live in the suburb 25 minutes away who have been going to the church for 30 years, or is our community the place where we are physically located? And I don't think that there's a right answer to that, but you do need to decide. And if the answer is where you're physically located, then you need to you need to shift your strategy accordingly. If you're going to say, no, it's the people who have been driving, then you probably need to move. You probably need to sell your building to a church that's willing to reach that geographical location and go build a church 25 minutes away where all of your folks live.
Yeah.
So, side note, but you need to define what your community is, and then, as we're about to talk about a little bit more here, know what it is and know what it's like. So how would we do that? How would we know our community, AJ?
Yeah, right. Well, the short answer is ask. And so we've got some options that we would definitely want to throw out to you. So a community needs survey, and that'll take various forms, but really engaging with people. And so this could be setting up outside of a grocery store, or some other, common place, probably numerous places, depending on, again, how big your area might be. Something on this, Scott, that I've always thought, you don't need to even necessarily identify who you are, or even that you're a church.
No, I usually tell folks, don't wear a church t-shirt, whatever, because you're trying to get as unbiased data as possible. So you just say, hey, we're running a survey about needs in our community. Would you be willing to take a minute and a half to fill this thing out?
Yep. And put some thought into that, whether it be, multiple choice or just open-ended questions, just as long as you don't steer people's answers at all. But another great way, meeting with other people in the community that are already engaging with people in the community. Right. A great one that Scott has mentioned here is school counselors. They're really going to know what's going on in a lot of families. And so, again, depending on how big your school district is, or, how many schools might be around your church, that's going to be a great place for information. Other outreach centers, nonprofits, pregnancy centers, homeless shelters, food pantries, engage with people that are in the know over there and find out how big is the need, how common is the need. Other community leaders, maybe it's city officials, maybe it's, fire departments, police departments, these kinds of things. But I would focus probably heavily on doing a survey, and which could even be door to door, and school counselors. I think you're going to get a lot of information that way.
Yeah. One of the things I love about school counselors, and the schools in general, is that they have both a broad range of understanding, and they can give you some specifics. So what I mean by that is they can tell you, a school counselor can tell you, hey, out of the 500 kids who attend this school, we have about 10% of our kids who are dealing with food insecurity, or it's 30% of the families, or 40%, or 50%. They're going to have actually raw data on that based on free and reduced lunch forms that get filled out. Of course, right now with the pandemic, everyone's getting free lunch, but they're going to know those specific numbers. So they'll be able to tell you. So that'll give you a good clue. Hey, do we have a lot of disadvantaged families in our area that we could be reaching? Or is this, our perception is it's pretty affluent, and that rings true with what we're seeing from the school. But they're also going to be able to give you specifics and go, well, food's not really a problem because that's being taken care of by school and these other community partners. But a real problem that we're seeing is after school care, or kids not having the clothes that they need for school, things like that. They're going to be able to give you some specific challenges that are happening at whatever scale. Or they may be able to tell you, hey, most of our kids live in a broken home. Whatever. They're going to be able to give you this kind of information. They're not going to be able to tell you about specific kids, probably because of privacy concerns, but they can paint the picture for you. So I love meeting with school counselors because they usually have a broad base of understanding. Whereas if you're meeting with just the local food pantry, the food pantry is only going to know about the people who come to the food pantry, whereas a school counselor is going to have a good pulse on what's happening community-wide because the school draws from the whole community.
Yeah.
So just a little hack there on a good people to talk to.
Yep, there you go. All right, Scott. So we're going to move into our 5 points here now. So quick mention. You can find these mentioned in the book Boomerang, The Power of Effective Guest Follow-Up by Tyler Smith and Allison Hoffmeyer. So yeah, oh, there, Scott has a picture for you YouTube watchers.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so that's where we we got these points and then really dove into them a lot deeper to help bring some some actual things into the church that you could utilize these on.
So some context here. So on page, it's really early on in the book. I think it's page 4 in the book. They just kind of casually mention, hey, there's five main reasons why a person would usually show up to church. It's these five things. And as I read the book a few weeks ago, and it's a good quick read, I recommend it. I was thinking, well, this is actually a really helpful framework for thinking through outreach. It's not how they position it necessarily in the book. I just thought it just was a light bulb moment for me and went, I think we could use these same 5 Ds, which they're using to talk about guest follow-up and communication. I thought we could use these same 5 Ds as a point for thinking about our outreach strategy. Mm-hmm. So there are 5 Ds, and we'll explore each of them here in a little bit more depth, but I'll just briefly mention what they are, AJ. The 5 Ds are divorce, death, displacement, disaster, and development. And so once you've done the work, AJ, to know your community, really think about your community like a missionary would. Imagine that you were picked up, taken to Timbuktu, and you didn't know the language, you didn't know the people, and you really had to learn what's going on here, what are the needs, what are the challenges, what are the people like. Similarly, take that same approach to your community. And I know that's hard because if you grew up there, you can make a whole bunch of assumptions. Or if you've been a pastor at this church for 20 years, you probably think you know your community. I guarantee you probably don't know it to the degree you need to know it.
Yeah. So
do the work that we were just talking about in knowing your community. So once you know that, you can use these 5 Ds as a lens to think about what are the biggest challenges facing our community and how should we shape our outreach strategy so it's tailored to the specific needs, challenges, and problems in our community.
Yeah.
So with that, let's dive into the first D.
Yeah, the first one is divorce. And so right away, tagging off of what you just said, probably everybody listening is like, oh, well, that's everywhere. Everybody I know is divorced. And it's probably not true. So we've heard lots of scary divorce rate numbers before, but there's also a lot of evidence that really isn't the case. So it may very well be high where you are, but it also might not. And so, right. Divorce care may or may not be a good option for your church. So use some resources to determine what level that might be in your area. There's some research that you can do on places like thearda.com, the Association of Religious Data Archives. Services like Glue can help you determine what the divorce rate might be in your area. But then divorce care, like post-divorce care, maybe is a good option, but also things, Scott, addressing what causes divorce in the first place. Maybe get to the root of the problem before it turns into the issue that divorce becomes.
Yeah. So this is all right. So for example, one of the common drivers for divorce is going to be money fights and money problems. Mm-hmm. Okay. So it's one of the top 5 for sure, things that drives divorce rates. So offering something like Financial Peace University, well, you might hear that and go, well, that's not revolutionary. Like lots of churches are already offering Financial Peace University. I thought you were going to give me something outside the box. Okay. I understand. But think about this. It's not just about offering Financial Peace University. It's about how you communicate Financial Peace University and to whom you communicate that offering. So let's say, you decide, hey, we realize that in our community, money fights and money problems is a primary driver for divorce. Divorce rates are high in our community. What could we do to address this? We're going to offer Financial Peace University. We're going to run ads on Facebook. The ads might say something like, money fights killing date night. Sign up for Financial Peace University at First Community Church and save the joy of your next night out. So now we're not just offering Financial Peace University as just a good thing that you should do.
Mm-hmm.
You're positioning it as the solution to the money fights that you're having that are killing date night with your spouse.
Yeah.
That's a totally different approach than what most churches are doing. They're just listing it on their website as just another offering of something they're doing versus leveraging this tool, Financial Peace University, as something to address a critical problem in the community, which is divorce that's driven, at least in part, by money fights. Does this make sense, AJ?
Absolutely. Because most of the time when you drive through any town and you see it on, the marquee outside, maybe you're a high-tech church and you've got a colored sign, like a multicolored electronic sign, or you've stuck the letters up on your broken down sign and you're using a backwards 3 for the letter E because you're out of E's, and all it says is Financial Peace, Wednesday 7:00. So
what does that mean? Yeah, why should I care?
Changing something completely.
That's right.
So that's
something like Celebrate Recovery. If lots of substance abuse and pornography addiction, these are things that drive divorce as well. So, offering things like Celebrate Recovery to help people recover and get the support that they need to fight those addictions that are ending marriages. So again, and then not just offering it, but specifically then targeting through social media and other avenues, these folks who could benefit from these services that might save a marriage.
Mm-hmm.
I fully believe that if divorce rates are high in your area, you could make a measurable impact on those divorce rates in your community if you got serious about tackling that problem.
Yeah.
I believe that.
Yeah. All right.
Let's move on to the next one.
Our second D is death. Talking about death on the podcast today, everyone's favorite topic. But the fact is everybody dies, and for various reasons. So now, of course, we're, hopefully nearing the end of COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, death is, high on a lot of people's minds, and it disproportionately affected some cities and communities more than others. And certainly some population groups as well, age groups. Yeah.
Right.
So, dealing with death either in the short term because of something like COVID-19 or, other causes that may have made it spike, long-term death care might also be a need in your area. We're beginning work with a church right now in a very aged population center, a retirement area. And we've talked with a lot of these churches, especially in retirement places, southern warm climate, Florida, Arizona, places that a lot of people retire to. That may be you listening today. And, death is kind of a natural thing. I mean, you might be that pastor that does 3 funerals every week. And because we've had those conversations for sure. So dealing with death on a more regular basis in your church might be a great way of reaching your community.
Yeah. So just knowing your community, if you live in a retirement community, offering something like Grief Share might be really helpful. But also in a place like the Pacific Northwest or in the Northeast, where there's a lot of agnostics and atheists, something like the pandemic has, I think, caused a lot of people to ask more existential questions. I think that no matter, I don't know when you're listening to this, because it's a podcast, it has a long life. You may be listening to this 5 years from now, and the pandemic is in the rearview mirror. I hope. I hope. But I do think that the pandemic, maybe one of the lasting effects of the pandemic, even in the future, may be just a greater awareness of death. We live in a society that's forgotten death, and having it in the headlines, I think, brings up these existential questions. So having a program like Alpha that is geared towards answering questions of skeptics and agnostics and atheists, that could be good. So just death as an opportunity to mourn with those who mourn. When Lazarus died, Jesus wept. And likewise, the church needs to step into these moments to offer both comfort and hope. And it is an outreach opportunity to reach people with comfort and with hope.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on.
Our third D is displacement. So, and I think this is really a cool one as well, because I think it can get overlooked, but people that are, just they're either new to your community because of something else, or maybe you even live and have a church in an area that just has more of a transient population. Military towns, college towns, maybe even border towns that have immigrant populations coming through. These are all things that identify your community and make it unique. And we've worked with a lot of, especially college town churches that are like, what can we do? They're here for a few years, they leave. Nobody sticks around. We can't get volunteers. We can't do this or that because people aren't here. Well, God still has sovereignly placed you there. And even though people may not be there for long periods of time, they're there for a little while. And so what can you do to minister to those folks, to meet their needs? And then, I've had this conversation numerous times with pastors that, are always kind of bummed out because their people aren't around for a long time. I'm like, what can you do to build those people up and send them out? Are you not now in a position for creating missionaries of sorts that will go places and bring the name of Jesus with them? So changing your perspective on a transient population or displaced population church area can really affect how you see those people, how you reach them, and then how you send them. Focusing on displacement as outreach, I think, is a great thing to do.
Yeah, I think that, a lot of churches are doing outreach events that would be great for high traffic areas, but they aren't in one. So, for example, throwing block parties and, a church picnic and big carnivals and festivals and bazaars and whatever. These are all things that are really good at getting people who don't have a home church, don't know anybody, giving them an opportunity to mix and kind of meet people and maybe find a church home. I live in a place where I grew up in Dallas, which is a place where people move in and out all the time. My girlfriend in high school, actually, her dad had gone to our high school. And we thought that was crazy. We were like, what? Your dad went to our high school? That's nuts. I live in a place now where it's kind of crazy if your parent didn't go to one of the local high schools, because people don't really move away from here very often. And so those same kinds of things like picnics, bazaars, that it just doesn't offer the same outreach value because people already have these long-standing relationships. So doing block parties and things like that are good in a community where people don't have friendships. When you are doing them in a place where people have a lot of friendships already, the value is less. I'm not saying it has no value, it just has less value. Also think about places that have seasonal migration. I live near a community, not my specific community, but maybe 30 minutes away, where there are literally hundreds of migrant farmers who come in every summer. Most people in our area like to pretend like those folks just don't exist, but they do exist, and they're not illegal immigrants. They are legal migrant farmers that come every year. And there's a need there. There's a need for the gospel. Those people need the gospel too. And it would be good if our churches in this area took that group of people seriously and served them. And so maybe that's you. Maybe you live in a rural area where that's an opportunity. So don't forget the displacement D. There's opportunity there.
Yeah, absolutely. Our fourth D is disaster. And when we use the word disaster, most people, Scott, are probably thinking, the hurricane, the tornado, the building collapse.
Right.
And yes, those things exist. And yes, your church should be doing that. We're thinking more on sort of long-term disasters, things that are always ongoing,
Mhm.
I like the phrase you use, Scott, slow rolling disasters.
Yeah.
And this might be one of the more important ones that some churches do recognize these things, and they engage in them, and others do not. But yeah, drug addictions, opioid epidemics, these would fall under the disaster category. High incarceration rates. I mean, you might even have a prison, a state or federal prison, maybe not too far away, and maybe
Mhm.
a lot of people are there that live within reach of your church. So
Right.
um, any of these things that I mean, you've got lots of examples in here. Any of these things that really maybe even disproportionately affect your community would fall under this disaster category.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's foster care, that there's a huge surge in foster care, being a church that helps step into that. There's all kinds of ways that you can get connected. You know, the things that drive poverty, AJ, are things like uh, the uh, not getting a job, obviously, um, fatherless homes.
Hmm.
These kinds of things are the things that drive systemic issues long term.
Yeah,
You know,
high school
you're
dropout.
likely to be on government assistance and be in poverty in America if you live in a one parent home, if you drop out of high school, and if you don't get a job.
Yeah,
These are all problems the church used to care about and used to help solve, but has largely stopped. They've kind of abdicated that to, you know, other nonprofits and the government. And your church could step into these slow rolling disasters. It
hmm,
could, helping to save marriages, helping people find jobs, connect people to jobs. You can help single moms. You can help foster care. You can help. There's all kinds of ways that you, as a church, can step into these slow rolling disasters. What is the slow rolling disaster in your community? It varies, and this is the point that we've been trying to make from the beginning, AJ, is that you can't take a one size fits all approach to outreach and assume that is the biggest problem that we see churches make, is they immediately jump to the food pantry, the homeless shelter, or
hmm.
whatever, thinking that that's the greatest area of need. But it may very well not be, because problems are not ubiquitous. They're not the same. The specific challenges in your community are unique, and if you know what the slow rolling disaster is in your community, you should address that specifically.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Let's move into our last one, Scott. And this is a really important one as well. And the word is development. The D word is
Mhm.
development.
Mhm.
And unlike the others that are all sort of, they could be even crisis situations, responding to something. This one is more almost undercover, I think, in a lot of the need areas, maybe more unspoken. Um, and
It's more opportunity focused.
yeah, building people up in ways that maybe doesn't seem like a negative, maybe more of a positive.
Right.
Although a lot of these, they've got a negative side maybe that people don't want to address, but yeah, development, opportunity focused outreach, where you can build up people in your community to be able to lead better lives, to be able to change their family tree, as Dave Ramsey might talk about, so that they're able to parent better, and change the way their kids will grow up and become parents themselves. So I think this is definitely an overlooked area, Scott.
Yeah, and it can exist in any community. So, offering programs to an after school program to bridge the gap for overworked parents, or designing programs that improve quality life for struggling families and community, right? But I think that the development aspect is maybe most critical in the places where it appears that there are no problems,
Hmm.
right? Very often we deal with churches that are in suburban areas, and the reason why they drive to the food pantry down in the downtown, or they go to the homeless shelter or whatever, is because their perception is there are no problems in their own community, and that's simply not true. They just might be more hidden. This is what Jesus specifically addresses throughout the Gospels. This self-perception in the Pharisees that they don't have any problems
Mhm.
because they're good people living good lives with good jobs. They're doing all the right things. They're checking all the right boxes. And Jesus says to them that they're the most hopeless because they don't see their own need. And so the challenge to the church, if you are a church in a suburban area like this, where your perception is that the people have no problems, you have to work extra hard to discover what those challenges actually are and speak to those, because the pain may not look as it's not as splashy of a headline as homelessness, but the pain is real to those people. And if the pain is real to a person, it should be real to your church. And so stepping into those problems, mental health issues or parenting problems or issues with kids or issues with marriages, these things that are opportunities maybe for development more than it is a crisis or a disaster, it's still real, and it's still an important opportunity. Basically, I'm saying if you feel like you have to go outside your neighborhood to do outreach, you don't know your neighborhood, because there are problems within 3 blocks of your church. I promise. If you don't know what they are, that's on you.
Nobody has the perfect life, and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and Twitter make it look like they do. We live in an Instagram world in which the best of the best pictures get posted, and it seems like everybody around you is constantly just on vacation or their kids are winning awards, and that's not reality. I mean, think about yourself. You're probably, you watching and listening right now don't have the perfect life, you know it, and you're wondering how everybody else does. They don't. So, that's one of the points here that I don't know if we made it clear at the beginning. You would be hard pressed to find anybody that wouldn't fit into one of these 5 Ds. You probably will have large groups of people that would fit into one or more of these Ds. Don't try to address them all. If you're a church of 10,000 people, then sure, you've got staff and you can develop tons of outreach ministries. But for you, probably the pastor or leader in the church of 100 or 200 or 300, you're going to have to get focused. And that's why it's important to get to know, what's the largest group of people that we can affect positively that fit into one of these areas, and focus on that. We can't do it all, but we can do something. And so again, hitting these 5 Ds: divorce, death, displacement, disaster, and development. You can make a difference in one or more of these areas.
I want to close with this thought. Here's another D, a devotional type thought. I love the book. Anybody who knows me well, and AJ knows this about me, knows that I love the book of Nehemiah. It's one of my favorite books in the Bible. And I love the strategy that Nehemiah deploys to fix the walls in Jerusalem, which was a problem that had not been fixed for over 100 years. AJ just had been a problem for a very long time. These walls had been destroyed, and so his plan is genius. The plan is just build the wall, the section of the wall that was right outside of where you lived. Whatever was closest to you, that's what you should focus on. And as an analogy here, your church, don't worry about driving 35 minutes, an hour away to fix some problem in some other community. Worry about the community that's 3 blocks from you, not 30 minutes from you, 3 blocks. What problem can you solve that's closest to you? And if you'll focus on that, and if every congregation will do the right kind of outreach for their community, we can make a big difference. That wall, AJ, in the book of Nehemiah, that hadn't been fixed in over 100 years, was rebuilt in 52 days. 52 days. I'm tired of the church feeling like it can't solve generational problems. It can, but it starts with you fixing the wall right outside your church doors. And so use these 5 Ds to help you think through what we could do. It starts with knowing your community, but then apply this filter, apply this lens to discover how can we rebuild the wall outside our our church. And if we would all do this together, this country, this world, and the kingdom of God can expand. So that's all I got to say about that.
And so here's my final point, Scott. It shouldn't need to be said, but it does. And I know from experience that it does. We're talking gospel outreach. We're not talking community service. Any good-hearted person in organization can and does meet people's physical, emotional, mental needs. Only the Church of Jesus Christ can meet their spiritual needs. And that's the point to all of this. You can do lots of great work and help people for a short period of time. But if as a part of this, you're not bringing the name of Jesus to them and introducing them to the hope of the world and to salvation, then you're failing. I mean, there's no other way to put it. As a church, you're failing. And so no matter what strategy you develop, no matter what need you choose to meet, if it doesn't have an evangelistic component to it, in which you can meet people's spiritual needs and introduce them to Jesus, then you have failed in your mission as a church.
And I mentioned this in the article that any good outreach strategy is one side of the coin is something that we can do together, and the other side of the coin is personal evangelism and sharing your faith, and these things go hand in hand. And so I'm glad you mentioned that. These things are not one or the other. It's a both and type situation. You need both, and Jesus understood this. Jesus fed the 5,000 and also fed them spiritually. And so we ought to take the same approach. All right, to read today's article, go to malfirsgroup.com/102. So malfirsgroup.com/102. You'll be able to get the article there. This has been a little bit of a longer episode, we know, but one that we feel like is really important. So we hope that you will watch this. If you've been listening, go on YouTube, watch this episode, watch it with your board, watch it with your deacons, watch it with your staff, watch it with a group of people, and ask these key questions. We've put some questions in the description in the YouTube video that can prompt some good discussion with your team. And because we believe like this is critical. If you want to make a difference in your community and you would like to be a church that's healthy and growing and join that handful, small single-digit percentage of churches that are growing because of evangelism and outreach, this is going to help. And so subscribe on YouTube so that you don't miss an episode, but please watch this one with your team, ask these questions, and begin to dream what could be different about your outreach strategy in the future.
Amen. You can do it. We believe in you. Can't wait to hear how it goes. Thanks for being with us.
See ya.